now comes the fun part. I'm going to turn the floor over to the audience and take questions. Before I do, though, just one quick comment and clarification and observation. I think now you sort of see the underlying theme in this panel of people that have very different kinds of expertise, very different focuses, but underlying all of what they're talking about is new applications of technology to financial contexts. And that's changing so rapidly that I think we really require this kind of a crowd to be able to make sense of it all. Also, one minor clarification. So, Sandy, thank you for giving me credit for this. What we should be getting credit for, though, is taking the ideas that were developed decades ago here at MIT, largely by people like Silvio Micali and his colleagues on secure multi-party computation. Our claim to fame is taking these ideas and applying them to the context of financial regulation. And as I said, we have a number of regulators in the audience. In a few minutes, I'm going to actually call on a few of those regulators to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that they're looking at, what they're doing, and how they can think of using technology. For example, Mark Flood at the OFR has actually written a wonderful survey paper on using cryptographic methods in various kinds of regulatory contexts and some of the challenges. So the hope is that we're going to actually have lots of different crosstalk, both during the session and at the breaks, where we can actually take some of these ideas and think about how to implement them. So with that as the motivation, questions from the audience for our panelists. Yeah, Gary? Can you identify yourself first before we...
Gary Nantai, Urisk LLC. Could you comment on the impact of quantum computing, especially on encryption, for things like digital currencies? Because many of the algorithms that you're proposing could conceivably be attacked in that manner.
So that sounds like Sandy or Silvio. Do either of you want to take it?
You're the encryption guy. Well, that is a very tricky question to answer because quantum computing is not quite here yet, so it's very hard to figure out how much it can do. In principle, I don't, even if it should work as advertised and if it should scale, in principle, it just introduces, for security, you need a difference between things to go in one direction and the other direction. And if you accelerate things, you can actually handle bigger problems as well. So it's not clear that all of cryptography or all the somehow cryptocurrency are going to be affected. That you can actually base them in system and digital signature, for instance, that are not affected by quantum computing, or you can actually use quantum computing if it really becomes real, also to accelerate what the good guys are going to do. So right now we have to be a little bit agnostic. I'm sorry, I cannot say something more definitive, but that's the way I think.
Next question. Yes, Helen?
Helen Yang, Charles River. So my question is, if I were to start doing some big data mining in a meaningful way, how accessible or how daunting it is to get it started? Is it a matter of hiring a few people, renting a few servers, and then have a small upfront investment, or it is a much bigger endeavor to move forward?
Well, the first thing you should do is to hire our students from MIT. But Ron?
Sure. So we've been using big data for investing for 5 to 10 years now, and I would say it started out pretty small. And I think with Amazon Web Services, things, you have easy access to the computing power. You need to be able to handle the data. You need an infrastructure to clean data, to understand how to analyze it, and our team just keeps growing. So I think if you start out small, you're going to do just a few things, proof of concept, and go from there.
I was going to say, I agree you can start quite small. Our initiative is still pretty small, although we're leveraging some of the quant infrastructure we've already built. But in terms of personnel, as long as you have a handful of smart people, the technology itself doesn't cost that much. What does cost money, though, depending on what you're looking for, is the data itself. Sometimes you will actually have to pay for the data. If you're trying to develop an investment strategy, you may have to pay for the financial data.
So the thing see most often is that there's also a culture change that has to happen. So what most quants are sort of used to being in their office and doing things, and to actually talk to the people who make decisions who aren't used to listening to the quants is a major change on both sides.
And that's what I mentioned as a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about that as being one of the core things.
You know, I would add to that even in a group that's been very quant for a very long time, there is a change to going from people with PhDs in finance to PhDs in computer science, and you know, it's one of those things. It's such a small world that actually is a culture clash too.
Yeah.
Actually, let me add to that, because I think that's a very important point about culture. As an economist, I can speak to that pretty directly. That most of the economists that I talk to about big data and machine learning are extraordinarily skeptical of this entire set of tools. And as a result, many of these tools are not taught in economics department and PhD programs. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the progress that's being made, it's being made in computer science, mathematics, physics, fields that are outside of economics and don't have the kind of religious hang-ups that we do in economics. And actually, that pervades not just academia, but it also affects regulatory agencies. And actually, that's been changing over the course of the last few years. So as part of some of my activities involving government agency advisory boards, I've actually learned that some really interesting things are going on at the various different agencies. So can I just take a couple of minutes and ask a few of those individuals from the CFTC, SEC, OFR, maybe just in the Fed, just to say a few words about what they're doing with regard to some of these tools and technologies. Sai Srinivasan, are you from the CFTC? Are you, can you say a few words?
Should I sit or should I stand up? I'd stand up, I guess. So for those who don't know, CFTC is the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. We really don't spend much time worrying about commodities. Thanks to Dodd-Frank, we have regulatory authority over the major derivatives markets. I think we regulate about 95% of the derivatives markets. It's all price discovery markets across all the asset classes, starting from crude to interest rate derivatives and others. We also regulate clearing houses. So we get a lot of data. We are data rich, but also say we are dumb data, because we need to have intelligence about how people are transacting in the markets and so on and so forth. So a couple of things we are doing is we're getting a lot of data. It's new data. So it tends to be, it's messy. There's a lot of plumbing which is being put in place to send the data to the regulatory authorities. The holy grail is to, just thinking about systemic risk and network and so on and so forth. Historically, when people, economists and others have looked at systemic risk from sort of the financial institution perspective, it's been from the banking side. You had aggregate data from SEC filings and filings with the banking authorities, aggregated data, balance sheet data. What we now have is access to granular transaction level data and positions data. And working with the data is a challenge. First of all, because we didn't necessarily ask for, the data is designed with a particular purpose in mind. It's not with sort of the end economic analysis in mind. So the challenge is, and then when you start working with the data, you need to worry about the institutional details. So we see a lot of research coming out applying some of the network theories and models to the data. And if the 99.99% out of, you'll find the researchers ignoring key critical institutional details. So if you're working, say, taking this credit default swap market and sort of trying to map it out and trying to figure out, what are the default risks, and you ignore the fact that most of it is actually being cleared through clearing houses, the results will be pretty challenging. So we're spending a lot of time working with the data, cleaning up the data, and it's fun. At the same time, we are small institutions. The CFTC is notoriously underfunded. But historically what we've done is we've worked with the academic community pretty closely. So when Andy sort of invited me here, the idea was to sort of reach out to the community and the students to sort of come work with us and collaborate with us. So
Great, thank you, Saeed. Now, I see somebody from the SEC. Is Giulio Girardi going to say a few words about what you're doing?
Yes. So at the SEC, we have economists that engage in rulemaking on one side, and then they do risk assessment on the other side. I'm one of the economists that work in the risk assessment side. On the risk assessment side, the things that we try to go after are indeed case of fraud, market abuse, risk, and so forth. And what I can say without getting too much into details is there is always a tension between quantitative folks, such myself and statistician, programmer, that want to build, if you want to call it, complicated, sophisticated models, and other folks within the commission that have less of a technical background, that are indeed the folks, though, they are carrying out those inspection examination of these hedge fund, mutual fund, broker-dealer, and so forth. And so despite the fact there has been in the press some articles about SEC deploying Robocop of these sophisticated model, the truth of the matter is that my experience has always been that the most successful model, the one that are more widely used within the SEC, are the one that have some kind of institutional knowledge of economic understanding that can be explained to folks across the commission that don't necessarily have a PhD in statistics and economics. People are very much reluctant to trust models that are a black box. And it doesn't matter if you backtest the model and you show them, hey, look, this is the hit rate of the model. It helps you improve the accuracy of the examination by this much %. If people don't understand where the results is coming from, for instance, talking about PCA, that's one of the problems, right? You can do all the PCAs you want. People don't understand what these factors are. They're very reluctant to use those models as a risk ranking tool. So there is always this tension between what the model tells you, suggests you, and what people understand of these models. So that's, and I'm sure there is no unique of the SEC. It's probably true among any organization.
Great. Tobias, do you want to say a few words from the New York Fed?
I'm Tobias Adrian from the New York Fed. So one of the recent initiatives that we have started to work on is called measuring supervision. So supervision is an important activity of the Federal Reserve. We are supervising, the biggest banks as well as community banks. And one of the challenges in supervising is that it's difficult to measure output, right? The goal of supervision is to ensure the safety and soundness of financial institutions, but what does it mean that financial institutions are safe and sound? So the Measuring Supervision initiative is basically aiming at taking internal Federal Reserve data on the way in which supervisors are allocating their time. So like we drill down into big databases over a very long time, looking at hundreds of supervisors, how they use their time, and how this time allocation is then leading to outcomes such as supervisory guidance, and how that kind of outcome is impacting the performance of the institutions, i.e. the safety and soundness of the institutions into the future. So it's sort of like trying to use, relatively big data to enhance the way that the Fed is conducting supervision. So we're very excited about it. There's a series of papers on the New York Fed's website that you can take a look at. Of course, we work on many other big data kind of projects, including high-frequency data, et cetera.
Right. Thank you. And Mark Flood from the OFR, do you want to just come up here? You have a great, thank you.
So thank you, Andrew, and thank you for pointing out our survey paper. Appreciated. One of the things that we do in that paper is identify 3 specific flavors of secure sharing that would be of interest to the supervisory community. We sort of face this this problem in Technicolor because again we're a systemic supervisor, and there are all forms of sharing that are possible and useful. So. For example, one is sharing among the regulators themselves. We've been talking with the CFTC about confidential data, and even though we're both regulators, we want to be very careful with these handoffs. Would it be possible to use secure multi-party computation to share information without revealing the details? Another is sharing with the world at large. So, for example, you might imagine that we discussed this in the paper. The Cleveland Fed has a systemic risk index. They've got a public version that you can look at on their website. They've got an in-house version that they don't share because one of the inputs to the in-house version is confidential supervisory information. They were interested in finding out, is there a way to certify using differential privacy that an aggregated index like this fails to reveal the juicy bits from the confidential supervisory information while still exposing the signal to the markets at large. A third example is sharing with researchers. The FHFA, Federal Housing Finance Agency, and CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, have a big database of mortgage data. They are sure that there are interesting patterns and stories in there. They would love to share it with researchers, but the privacy laws prevent them. They're interested in finding ways to use secure multi-party computation to do this. We've also been talking with Andrew and some folks about some other possibilities going forward. I'm not sure I can reveal those at the moment, given the status of things, one last shout out to folks in the room. So I've personally got a project that could really use a PhD student who's interested in differential privacy stuff. We're ready to go with it. If you're interested in those topics and would like to apply them to a financial data set, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's actually a very important point to emphasize, which is that the regulators, in addition to having an incredible mandate to deal with some of the most challenging issues for the financial industry, they also happen to have a lot of the data. In fact, in some sense, they have all of the data. And so one of the reasons that we wanted to have them here and to identify them specifically is to make sure that the students and faculty are able to connect with them and be able to consider working on projects. It's unlikely that they're ever going to give us the data, but they can certainly allow us access to the data and collaborate with them to use it. And a number of academics, including myself, have actually worked with members of the government agencies and have done some really interesting things. So I'd encourage you all to get in touch. Mark?
Sorry, this just in. So I just got the email from our general counsel. I can mention that we're trying to set up a challenge competition using some of these secure multi-party tools. Details to be released sometime soon. It's still in the works, but.
A challenge competition, meaning a contest where you can win prizes. Okay. So we got a couple more questions, and then I'm going to conclude by asking the panelists if they can each suggest one particular area that would be most productive for us to be able to collaborate with those in this room. So yes, Michael.
So a little twist on the data side of it.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Mike Diadio from WorldQuant. We're a quantitative trading firm. So we have about 5 people scouring the world like Santa Claus on his sleigh looking for data. I mean, it's a big part of our business. And obviously, when we find data, we have to assess the appropriateness. We have to worry about privacy. We have to worry about material non-public. And those are pretty clear. We're now getting into situations, and I ask this of those in the industry who are users of data and maybe those in the regulatory community, where there's a sense of, or something coming that's not as clear, which is the data too exclusive to use for trading purposes, even if there's no material non-public, and even if it is privacy and anonymized and everything like that. And this is something we're having a lot of debates on, and there doesn't seem to be any clear guidance. So I ask those in the industry that use data, have you come across that yet? And I'll give you an example. You have There's actually been some press recently. You'll have a data provider that says, we're only going to give this data to 25 trading firms. Is it okay to use that to trade? And that's very gray at the moment in our view, and there's a lot of internal discussions. So I'm just looking for other people's views on that, and if there's going to be clarity or anyone's seen any clarity.
I haven't had to deal with the exclusive data issue quite yet, although I can see it coming. Although I've kind of heard about it, but we may not have actually subscribed to the data. So I see what you mean. But a lot of the stuff, the regulations, the laws are kind of murky. And Fidelity is a big organization, and we take the high road whenever we do anything. So it's why we actually have kind of a task force steering committee that helps me run this program, and we have a lawyer that's part of it. One area that's actually kind of murky that a lot of people are very actively involved in is web scraping. Web scraping is actually done all day long by a lot of shops, but it's it's kind of questionable whether or not it's legal to use the investment process. So that's one, and all of those, we're wrestling with those issues, but that's why we always have a lawyer involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ron?
Well, no, we have one just assigned to this. Trust me, we have plenty, and we always take the high road.
Right.
I mean, I would just reinforce that. I mean, at BlackRock we do the same thing. I mean, we have a lot of. I mean, we've seen changes in how regulators look at this, and we have to get legal sign off on any data we use. We're very concerned about web scraping. So there are occasions where we've done some research on something and then have been told, well, we don't have permission to use this, and we don't use it. But we're also in the same position of being such a large organization. We're not trying to push the boundaries on that.
Mona, and then here.
So part of what is somewhat related to your question is Mona Verne from Thomson Reuters. A lot of the conversation we have outside of the financial industry is this notion of all this new business model, and your colleagues here at Sloan talk about platform business model. So now imagine, which is actually not far from reality, that I can, through all my agricultural equipment, get data on most of the US crop real time, and I realize that all this IoT data is really valuable, and I'd like to monetize it. And by the way, so is all the data in this phone, and all this IoT is deployed, and it's quite expensive infrastructure, so I want to find a way to make that data useful. So I wonder if, so I think that's coming, and the question is who's going to regulate it, because the people that are interested in it are in the financial system, and it's also likely to change the financial system because suddenly there is all this new data source. I just wonder if this is just too ahead, you guys are seeing it happen, and how are we going to think about this data in the context of the system?
So let me just take a quick step because we're running out of time, and we have one more question here. I think that's a fantastic question, and I'm not sure that anybody here has the answer, but I believe that collectively we might be able to come up with a proposal given the people that are in this room. For example, we've got folks from all of the regulatory agencies represented. I suspect that they don't have the answers yet either, because this is a very complex issue. But this is exactly why we want to have this IDSS finance group. It's because there are these technological issues that have all sorts of implications for legal, regulatory, financial considerations. And the hope is that we're going to be able to take up that issue. That may be one specific issue we want to focus on at one of the future IDSS finance meetings. Last question, and then I'm going to turn to the panelists for closing remarks.
Hi, Sonia Gibbs at the Institute of International Finance in Washington, D.C. I guess this is really for sort of James and Ron, but you'd also touched on it, Daryl, with rehypothecation. But think about financial flows. Typically, you use these as part of the investment process. It's very interesting to see what's going on with capital flows. Always it was quarterly, balance of payment. Now you can get it more frequently, monthly. EPFR have higher frequency data, even daily data for some stock exchanges. I'm just wondering if either of you is looking at these as part of your process, or what might be being done with them.
Well, I would say I think the flows data. I mean, when I was in graduate school, one paper I wrote for my thesis, I think, used quite a lot of flow of funds data, which, the Fed has, tried to address, but frankly, the flow of funds data has a lot of weaknesses to it. I mean, both there's a big category of residual that's kind of just that, as opposed to really explaining it. The hedge fund sector, I think, is notoriously, poorly captured in the flow of funds data. And then, as you say, clearly the bulk of it is on a quarterly basis. There's a tremendous amount of value, I think, in trying to understand, all those flows in the different sectors and the different instruments. So the way the database is laid out and, is very useful, but it could be a lot more useful. So, I would certainly think that that would be a great initiative to try to take that, to the next level overall. I think that researchers in general in economics would be very supportive of that. It's not an easy project, or it would have been done by now, but there's a lot of value there.
When you say flows, you mean fund flows, right? In and out of funds? Yeah. Yeah, that's what I thought you meant. I mean, right now, we're not really using that in the process. I know that there are some vendors out there that do provide that kind of data. We have not really found much value in it. Although we are looking at it again right now. The problem is it's all lagged, and so it's just right.
But some of this, like, for example, some of the stock exchanges now, the Indian stock exchange, for example, you get daily data on flows.
And we haven't quite gotten into that yet. And obviously, as Fidelity, we have a lot of fund flow data, but that's completely off limits. And oh, by the yeah. Sorry,
Ron?
go ahead.
I would say, actually, we find the fund flow data very interesting and use it in a lot of ways. Not our own flows in the same way, but publicly available flow data.
Okay, well, we can go on for another hour, obviously, with all these interesting questions, but time is up, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for the break and then the second session. But before I do that, I'd like to ask each of the panelists in 30 seconds or less, can you suggest the one topic that you would like to see IDSS focus on collaboratively with the folks in the room here? What would it be? Sandy?
Well, I think probably the one that I'm most interested in is the notion of being able to do better data sharing and how some of the peer-to-peer effects, as I talked about, affect herding and effects like that.
Great. Darby?
I guess I kind of talked about it before, but a lot of the data sets we're using are very short-term in nature. So to the degree we can do research to develop models or signals that are longer-term in nature would be more useful for us, at least in terms of what we're doing. Silvio?
So data sharing is okay, but particularly in an academic crowd, and I believe that the non-academic is similar, there is also a question of credit. So I believe that the trick is to enable data sharing while keeping the credit, and we need to develop new models and new mechanisms for doing that.
I think it's about crowdsourcing algorithms, and that's one place where we don't have anything going on.
Great. Ron?
I think what we do is a lot of proprietary work on increasingly publicly available data. So one would be ways in which we could sort of increase the availability of data that anybody could access so that we could do our own work on it. And then, of course, we're always interested in algorithmic improvements, whether it's NLP or deep learning or any of a number of other areas.
Daryl?
Yeah. I think from a social perspective, I think the systemic risk agenda has got to be, probably at the top to me. Now, obviously, the sharing piece, I think, contributes to that. But I would go back to what I said in the talk about, self-reinforcing behavior, positive feedback, trying to use these techniques to get a better understanding of how that develops, what's going to intensify it, what are the key preconditions, for generating it, and how to stop it when it's important to do that. So I think that would be a key valuable strand of research.
Terrific. Well, this has been a fascinating panel, and I want to thank not only the panelists but the audience. Please join me in thanking them. And